This is Vote Her In, a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. On today's episode, we speak with Dory McWhorter, the CEO of the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly, and this is Vote Her In, which is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. And I'm going to turn this over now to Rebecca, who will introduce today's guest. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and glad to be with you. I just wanted to say a couple words as a preface. We have a very important guest with us today. We are talking to you still from quarantine in Chicago and also during this time of great troubles in Chicago and elsewhere around the country. And so I thought that the best thing we could do was to speak with about what is going on and with someone who is an expert and deeply cares. And so I'm pleased to tell you that I've asked my friend Dory McWhorter, who's the CEO of the YWCA of Metropolitan Chicago, to join us today. Dory grew up on the South Side. She has a wonderful story of personal and professional success. And I can tell you from having worked with her for, I think, over a decade at this point on a number of projects related to some of the issues we're dealing with now, that she is just so thoughtful while also being very positive. So Dory joins us today, and we'll begin by saying, Dory, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
And one of the things that we thought would be important to sort of kick off the conversation with Dory is to ask her to share with us, some of you may know that the mission of the National YWCA is eliminating racism and empowering women. So that's a constant, but given what happened last week with the murder of Mr. Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other tragedies, the YWCA also issued a statement about this, and I wanted to ask Dory to start our conversation today by sharing with us the rationale behind the statement, what she sees coming out of it for not only people in Chicago, but all over who care about this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Rebecca. So from our perspective, we wanted to make sure that, one, we made a statement to demonstrate to the world that what happened is clearly not okay, but also to make the statement that we have to do better. We have to call out these injustices, but we also have to make sure that we're not just doing posts, doing statements, and not putting the right actions behind it. So with our statement, we wanted to be clear that no, what happened to Mr. Floyd was absolutely not acceptable, but the ongoing disenfranchisement of African Americans that have been occurring throughout history is also not acceptable. And we're calling on society and our partners to really make a change and to understand that we can use this moment and definitely start to talk about what those solutions are, but make sure that we're committing to really getting that done. I think our mission statement, as you mentioned, Rebecca, says it all, that our mission is to eliminate racism and empower women. But what's often not talked about is the rest of that statement says that we will do this by promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. But we recognize that we have to start with those who are experiencing the most disenfranchisement. And clearly at this moment, what we continue to see happen to African Americans is a priority for us.
And can you share with us and our listeners some of what you think may happen next? I know it's just been a couple days since you issued the statement, but of course there are, ongoing activities of the YWCA, and I'm sure thoughts about what might be next.
Sure. For us, it looks like, one, we need to continue to highly invest in the work that we were already doing, as you know, Rebecca, in community So, for example, we were already during the COVID crisis doing additional food distribution. Well, now the grocery stores have gotten looted in our communities. We need to do even more food distribution. So I feel like we're always in the position where we're having to make up for the atrocities that have happened, and yet we continue to find ourselves in the position that what we do, we always have to do more of. And so we're actually calling on all of our different partners that care about this work from wherever they sit to really think about how they can most impact change and what does that look like. And in some cases, with our corporate partners, we're asking them to work with their people differently and understand what that could be. With our other community partners, we're asking them to see how we can come together and create different solutions and accelerate the pace of change. So, and of course, with our government leaders, we're always being thoughtful around what are some of the policy recommendations that we can have, but also digging into the data and what we're seeing, being that we are on the front lines in so many different ways across all of our different services.
So Rebecca mentioned earlier that it's not just, of course, Mr. Floyd. It was also in March, Breonna Taylor was killed by the police in Louisville, Kentucky. You know, this has been an ongoing problem, a miscarriage of justice. Can you talk some about, you know, what you see as sort of necessary to end this, to make sure that we're paying attention, that we're seeing these, you know, what is different now? You know, what sort of happened between March and now that really is finally getting people to sort of wake up and pay attention?
One, I think it's interesting. That's such a good question, because I think part of what's happened now is that because people are sort of contained by being at home, that we don't have as much competition for other activities that would distract people. We talk about all the time that the biggest competition for our work is mind share, right? How do we make sure that people are paying attention to our issues? But because people are to some degree limited to where they can go and how much they can get involved in, we have an opportunity. We almost literally have a captured audience that now that these situations are happening, people are more likely to see them because they just don't have as many other distractions as they would have at a normal time, whether they're running kids to school or running kids to another event or a sporting activity. Now they're at home and they're on social. Which they were on social before, but I just think in different ways that their activities have been limited. So there's an opportunity to really capture their mind share and help people understand what's actually been happening. And we know with Breonna Taylor that was something that hadn't made national news as quickly as some of the other situations that have happened over the past few weeks, or that we've become aware of, I should say, over the past few weeks.
Well, is it your thought in that context, Dory, that because people are more confined because of the pandemic, that they'll not only pay more attention, but consider what they ought to be doing about this? And if so, how do you see the YWCA's role in sort of activating people beyond the thinking to the doing to rid our society of these injustices?
Yeah, so we think we play with our mission a very important role because we have been historically involved in any social movement through, like at the YWCA Chicago, we're 140 years old. Nationally and internationally, we're over 160 years old. So you could pretty much know that any sort of social movement that would have happened at that time, the YWCAs were a part of it. And so as we sit here now, we are absolutely getting together as a team and really trying to be explicit around what those activities are for people to engage in, both personally and in their workspaces, because those also offer great opportunities for them to create change and understand what they could do. And really having those sort of individual activities, whether it's, as you're watching the news, looking at how they're displaying looters that are African Americans or people of color versus looters that they see are white, that I literally saw someone that described it as an employee versus a looter. And so it's interesting as people start to take note of these discrepancies that they could start to question themselves. What are their responses with their friends? How do they have conversations with their friends, with their family around the injustices that they see and the bias that they see play out as even these stories are being covered by the media, or how they are deciding to where they will engage, where they will shop, what brands they support based on the responses of those brands. So there's always sort of these personal activations that people can do. And it's going to depend, of course, on people's appetite to get engaged and what that looks like, as well as the opportunities that if people are at home and watching these things, but they also know that they lead people, how are they paying attention to their people and the needs of their people when they go back to work that are also experiencing what's happening in the trauma that these people are experiencing because of that? Are you increasing your EAP access? What are you doing in addition to how are you committing to supporting the change that you know needs to happen maybe in your workplace as well? So there's just so many different things, as you all know, that there's not one sort of magic formula to eradicate all of this, but we know it's going to take all of us doing all things, either small or large, to continue to accelerate the pace of change.
Yeah, one of the things I think is at hand, which isn't new to anyone really, but important, I think, to understand is that, in most of the cities, probably all of them, or the neighborhoods where the riots and disturbances are occurring, there is a high level of unemployment and a disparate impact on women, as you know well from your work. And so that, of course, was exacerbated by the pandemic's outcomes, and outcomes is not exactly the right word, I guess, but the results of the pandemic on employers and having to close offices and businesses. So I'm wondering if you can talk with us a bit about this issue of unemployment, the fact that it is high, is going to continue to be high for a while, and of course some jobs will not return, and how the YWCA sees its role in that aspect of the problems caused by both the pandemic and the disturbances.
Sure. I feel like a few things as we still, as you know, what the saying is, America catches a cold, the Black community catches pneumonia. And I feel like with every incident, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's this particular sort of increased awareness around racism that's causing people to finally pay attention in some of these areas, that, of course, we've already had higher levels of unemployment in the Black community before any of this, before the pandemic or anything else has happened. And so with the YWCA, we had already leaned into how do we connect people to those areas of the job and job growth that we saw with what we call either high demand or high growth job opportunities. So we were already looking at transportation, distribution, logistics jobs, construction jobs, technology jobs, and how are we connecting people to gain the skills they need for those jobs, and using industry-informed type of curriculum and the outreach that we were doing with our industry partners and our corporate partners to be able to place people in those jobs. So it's not enough just to give them the training, but also how do we support them in accessing those jobs once they do have the appropriate credentials or what's needed for those opportunities. And we've continued to do that and are actually calling for even more creative ways to look at opportunities to support more people in getting those types of jobs. Another thing that we're doing in the business development area, we are a small business development center and have continued to understand how we can get resources, because as you know, the businesses that are in the Black and Brown communities are going to suffer and aren't necessarily accessing at the same rates, the same type of resources that were made available through some of these stimulus actions. So how do we continue to maintain that and direct resources to these businesses? And even more so now, that to the degree that they were making it through the pandemic, if they had any of the looting or experiencing any of that type of outcome with what's happening right at this moment. We need to support those businesses even more and help them to rebuild and understand what that looks like for them. So from our perspective is that we just continue to double down in the areas that we were already investing in because they are the path forward. But now, how do we access more people in doing that? Because we know more people need our help even more so now.
So you've been an advocate for electing a woman president, along, of course, with Rebecca and me. We know now that the Democratic nominee most likely will not be a woman, but that the presumptive nominee has said that he will, in fact, name a woman for vice president. Can you talk some about, in this moment with so many challenges that we're facing, what qualities you'd be looking for in the vice president? Who you might suggest that Joe Biden could nominate? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that we could do a whole separate podcast just on this question. But I do think that we need someone that we know that is going to be very bold about these issues and take these issues head on. I think, unfortunately, some of the folks that we know have been put forward already have some serious concerns that we have serious concerns with, given the time that we're in and how those concerns will be highlighted. I think that we know that we need someone that is willing to take these issues on, is willing and has had the experience, I think, to lead in the ways that we need right now, because we're in such a bad shape that we know we need someone to be bold and take those actions and really connect with people and get them to the polls and be able to have the right surrogates that are also going to get people to the polls, because that is one of the best tools that we have right now to create change.
So, Dory, in that context, one of the things, and this, that the political science literature tells us, and also that we know from looking at the work of women electeds and women who are running for office, is that they are the candidates who talk about issues of concern to women, the challenges women have in particular. And of course, one of the other big areas of concern and work of the Y is around rape and domestic violence. And of course, that's a heightened concern right now because of women being at risk at home, some women being at risk because they're with abusers, and also because of street violence. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, how you're handling that, and also in that context, how you see this choice of VP candidate, how much it's important to you and your co-workers that she be someone who places the issues the Y cares about first and foremost.
Yeah, I think we have to have, back to what Kelly asked too, I think we have to have someone that's willing to ask a different question in a way that gives us the ability to have more bold solutions. So ask the question of how we know that, and it's been shown in other economies, how essentially the violence and abuse towards women really does hamper the growth of an economy. We've seen that in other global economies around the world, and we know this as a fact. And so if that's the case, we need someone asking the questions, well, how do we, if we want to grow the economy, then how do we make sure that all of the citizens are all of the participants in the economy are safe and free from violence so that they can fully participate? We need someone asking those questions and allowing the space for the bold solutions to come to really truly eradicate these things that we know are not only holding women back, but ultimately hold the entire economy back in our ability to really move forward. So it is absolutely important from a YWCA perspective that we ask those bold questions so that we really create the space for getting different solutions and not just asking questions or doing things that shows like that allows us that incremental progress. Like we're okay, I guess, as long as we have a hotline people can call, but that's not enough. We need more than a hotline. We need to be able to actually look at and call it out for the trauma and the violence and get to the root causes of these things and actually help communities heal and help people heal so that we can see truly a reduction in the cases of domestic violence and otherwise that often is highly correlated and connected to other forms of community violence. So I just think it's really important that we ask the big questions, not just how do we reduce it, but how do we eliminate it, right? And that's why we take such big, bold statements in our mission, because if you're asking how do you eliminate it, you have to have a different solution set than how do you make incremental progress in it.
So if you were, in closing, say you were making the speech today instead of Joe Biden, what would you kind of make what would be your big rhetorical outreach statements? What would you say?
I actually just posted on LinkedIn today that back in Lyndon Johnson's era, that we were making heavily invested in going to space and doing those things, but we chose not to invest in sort of healing the country and continuing to invest in eradicating racism. And now we literally are about to go to Mars with what Elon Musk is doing with his SpaceX. And we're still trying to address the issues of race. And so I guess for me, it really is about when are we finally going to make the decision that we have to, that society is failing because of racism, and what are we going to do to actually eliminate racism? And how do we engage everyone in society to make that happen? Corporate America can't sit on the sidelines. Political leaders can't sit on the sidelines. We have to address race head on and treat it as a sense of urgency that some of us have treated the pandemic of the coronavirus, because the pandemic of racism is just as dangerous and just as deadly as we're seeing. And so I just think if we could start there, that we will open ourselves up to so many other solutions and economic prosperity that we haven't really been able to really see. So for me, it's about how do we truly fulfill the promise of what America was supposed to be, if you actually lean into the things that divided us, which racism is from the days that the Pilgrims arrived to slavery, racism and marginalizing and oppressing others have been the very foundation of this country. And if we did actually solve this issue and address this issue, this country doesn't even know what's possible yet.
You all can now see why we were so pleased to have Dory join us today. I hope you'll keep listening to her and watching what the YWCA is doing. And I know Kelly joins me, Dory, in thanking you for joining us today. We hope you'll come back another time and talk with us about your sense of the progress we hope we're all going to make after we get past this time. So thanks again very much.
Thank you both. I look forward to working with you.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening, off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.